National Signing Day is less than 2 weeks away, so the recruiting battles inside the ACC are at a feverish pitch at this point. This is ACC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and this week we bring in Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC and also Joey Weaver from the Rumble seat. So we will get to the recruiting because we know people are the edges of their seats, making sure that those last-minute wishes come true and those guys jump on their side of the fence. But before we do that, of course, a substantial effort by Clemson in postseason play to get the ACC to the championship game. It was one of the better championship games we've seen in recent years. Joey, we'll kick it to you first in regards to Clemson's effort against Alabama. It wasn't quite enough. Early lead in the fourth quarter, 24-21. Then Bama pulled a few tricks and made some things happen in the kicking game in particular. Your thoughts about Clemson's run to the championship game and effort against the Tide?
There were two things that I thought were really, really impressive by Clemson in that championship game. First of all, being Deshaun Watson. He was incredible, and I think people kind of look at the stat line and think, wow, like almost 500 yards of offense. I think he broke Vince Young's record for offense in the title game. And that's really impressive by itself, but even just the individual plays, I mean, the tight windows he was making throws into, his ability to elude Alabama's pressure up front. I mean, there were some of those where it's like you thought he was like defying the laws of physics, like warping, into open space. It was amazing. So really, really impressed by him. I'm really intrigued to see what he can do next year, continue to develop, and to me, he looks like a pretty obvious number one quarterback off the board whenever he decides to go to the draft. So really interested to see kind of what he keeps doing. The other thing I was really impressed with in that game was how Clemson handled the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. I don't think it's any secret that offensive line-wise, particularly the guards and center for Alabama, as well as their defensive front seven, I mean, that's about as nasty as it gets in college football. And Clemson's offensive line and defensive front seven, I mean, gave Alabama everything they could handle. The offensive line was protecting fairly well against a really gnarly pass rush, and you had the defensive line that was able to, on most plays, was able to kind of contain Derrick Henry. They got a lot of pressure on Jake Coker. I think they had several sacks against him and caused all sorts of havoc in the backfield. So, again, it was a loss, and it took a kind of a garbage time score to make it a one-possession game. Obviously, a lot of talk about how Alabama won the game on special teams. I think that came a lot into play. I felt like Clemson really they missed just a few plays here and there. O.J. Howard, again, he had something like 5 catches for over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, I think. I mean, just a couple of blown coverages here and there. We might be talking about a different result. But it is what it is, and I was impressed with Clemson's showing. Thought they represented the ACC very well. It was nice, that they were kind of America's darling for the night as they were going up against big bad Alabama. But good performance. We'll see what they can do next year. They're looking like the favorites going in.
Joey, I think you bring up a good point with Clemson's offensive line doing a pretty spirited job against the Alabama front, because it's the simple analysis to look at the stat line for Wayne Gallman and say they couldn't run the ball. He went off the top of my head, maybe 14 for 50, 14 carries, 50 yards, something in that range, and to say, okay, Alabama shut him down. He ran for $150 against Oklahoma. But if you saw Alabama play LSU, at LSU, I'm going to go out on not much of a limb to say 3 or 4 of those offensive linemen starting for LSU will play in the NFL. Leonard Fournette couldn't get to the line of scrimmage 9 out of 10 times. Clemson gave Gallman at least there was a push, and I think we talked about it a number of times previewing the championship game. We knew Gallman wasn't running for $150 against Alabama, but they needed to at least take some pressure off Deshaun Watson, get a little bit of space, a little bit of a push, at least make them respect the run. And I think they generally accomplished that. And what was even more impressive in Gallman's camp is that late in the game, in the second half, they utilized him as a receiver, used his talents, got him out in space, and he proved to be an under-the-radar talent in terms of national perspective on running backs, and should come out in 2016 with a little bit more respect and attention on him as he looked for all ACC and maybe beyond that. Mike, 45-40, this Alabama defense has not been pushed to the limit like that, certainly not in 2015. You'd have to go back to the Ohio State game last year. They were not torched like this nothing close, mostly scores in the 10 to 15 point range per game, shutting out Michigan State. Then they hit Deshaun Watson. Joey did a great job of talking about Deshaun Watson's damage against the Tide. Just your thoughts about Clemson's effort.
Right, so Alabama had only one game this year other than Clemson where they played an offense that I wouldn't want to say was just as dynamic, but had some ability to it that Clemson has. And you looked at Ole Miss and Chad Kelly and what they did to Alabama earlier this year, put up a lot of points, they spread you out, and that's exactly what Clemson did. And with Deshaun Watson, I don't think any of us were extremely surprised with how he played. We've kind of been harping him as one of the best quarterbacks in the country for quite some time, and none of us are really surprised that he had success in this game. But I think what we are all a little bit surprised of is that Alabama didn't do as good a job stopping them as we might have expected. Now, I know that Alabama has given up some big games to quarterbacks, Dak Prescott, Johnny Manziel in the past, guys that can really move out of the pocket and can break down the defense with their legs when the passes are covered deep down the field. And Deshaun Watson did some of that in this game, but he was extremely effective throwing from the pocket, over 400 yards passing and 4 touchdowns. Had that one pretty rough interception there in the first half, but he bounced back admirably from it and finished the half strong. And Clemson really played well in the third quarter and went into the fourth quarter with a nice lead. And Mark, to what you alluded to with Wayne Gallman, I think a big story in this game was Alabama's ability not only to stop him, but for Clemson to make the adjustment to say, hey, the running game isn't necessarily working, but we can still get the ball in his hands and he can be dynamic. He had only 14 carries for 45 yards, so he was only averaging a little bit over 3 yards per carry, but they spread him out in the passing game. He had 3 catches for 61 yards, a couple big first downs there in the second half to keep Clemson rolling, especially in the third quarter. So Wayne Gallman played extremely well. I came away impressed with that, and Clemson's defense, like you guys spoke about, I mean, look, they lose Mackenzie Alexander in that game, and I think that, to some degree it hurt them in their pass defense of O.J. Howard. He got loose a couple times, and sometimes he was just running wide open, and you have to think that with Mackenzie Alexander out of the game, that had a little bit to do with the scheme that they were running and the fact that, hey, we got some new guys rotating in there that weren't necessarily going to be, hey, the primary corner or the secondary corner. I mean, everybody gets moved up a spot, and not having Mackenzie Alexander in there I think really hurt them in this game because O.J. Howard having 5 catches for 208 yards, and on 3 of those 5 catches he was running wide open. I mean, nobody within 15 or 20 yards of him. So I think that played a big factor, but I was pretty impressed with how Clemson handled themselves against Derrick Henry, and we all know that Alabama was going to give him the ball 30 or 40 times, but I thought Clemson overall did a pretty good job on him. He did have 36 carries in this game for almost 160 yards, but they held him to under 100 yards in the first half. I think it was 98 yards, and he had 2 touchdowns in the first 2 frames. And I think what was most impressive about that, even though he did put up almost 100 yards in the first half, I mean, most of that came on that 58-yard touchdown run there for the first score of the game. So Clemson from there on out did a pretty nice job on him. And, we could see them getting a little bit worn down there. A lot of his carries came in the fourth quarter, as we've seen time and time again from Alabama this season. When the game's on the line and when they're rolling, they put you away with Derrick Henry. And that's what we saw once again against Clemson. We're going to talk a lot about, the special teams plays. The onside kick was huge, and special teams played a big part in Alabama's victory. And Nick Saban said himself he didn't think that they could stop. He didn't think they could stop Clemson's offense, and I think it makes it a little bit easier running a trick play like that in that situation to decide to go with the onside kick because, if you figure that you're not going to stop them anyway, what does it matter if they get the ball at the 50 on an unsuccessful onside kick versus getting the ball at the 20 if you think in your mind that Clemson's going to score anyway. So a lot of people talked about how gutsy of a call it was for Nick Saban, and I don't want to take anything away from that, but that's what makes him great. In his mind, he thought Clemson was going to score if they got the ball back again, so it didn't matter where they got it, on the 50 or on the 20. So that proved to be a huge play in the game, and it ultimately swung the momentum to Alabama, and they were able to close it out. So just a very impressive performance, but Clemson definitely didn't embarrass themselves. I came away more impressed with Deshaun Watson than I think even I could have. Even though I've thought he was a great player all season long, he's definitely going to be a front runner for the Heisman next season.
Yeah, some proud Alabama fans should take that statement from Nick Saban and really let it sink in, because basically he was saying the best defense in the country, I'm not putting my faith and confidence in this defense because we've got a 24-24 game. So Clemson's got the ball, so they're going to beat us on possessions. They're going to have the ball last, or they're going to at least have as many, if not one more possession than us. I'm not trusting the defense to get a stop, so I'm going to flip possessions, hopefully get us one up in the scoring race here. And I'm not showing that confidence in my defense. They're gassed and they're getting torched right now. And again, this Alabama defense is for real. I think it's the best in the country. I think Ohio State's close. I think some other teams, Florida State until they played Houston, I thought was right there as well. Joey, looking at Clemson's effort, they acquitted themselves rather well. I think we can all agree there. There's obvious separation, as there is with all the other conferences, in regards to the top throughout the other tiers in the conference. The ACC went 4-6 in postseason play. Just your thoughts about the overall performance. Of course, Clemson's going to be the first team that people are going to look to, and despite the loss in the title game, okay, they beat Oklahoma, so they got to the title game. But beyond that, how well do you think the ACC performed in postseason play, and how much is that a reflection versus reality?
I mean, I think it went kind of the way that I was expecting for the most part. If you go back to the preview show where you're talking about kind of who we thought was going to win different games, a lot of those kind of ended up coming true. I think the big surprise to me maybe was Duke winning against Indiana. I didn't really see that happening, and they ended up rattling off, I think, 44 points in that game. So that was good to see. North Carolina against Baylor, what a huge disappointment. What an embarrassment to give up over 600 rushing yards. And I would say that it's not so much embarrassing that they lost, but the way that they lost that was embarrassing. That there was just never a point where they could figure it out and kind of pull it together. And so overall, I mean, I think that the results of the season, really, of the bowl season in particular, are not so much a reflection on individual team quality as much as the bowl matchups. I mean, we were talking about, I thought, Pittsburgh might lose to Navy, thought, Virginia Tech would beat Tulsa. A lot of these matchups kind of went the way that I saw them going. The other big one that really didn't go very well was obviously Florida State against Houston. That one on national TV in front of God and everyone, that's obviously a pretty frustrating loss. Sean McGuire did not play well at all, threw a lot of bad interceptions. There were some injury concerns as well, as his ankle was in like some big boot thing throughout the game. And so that one I think you could easily chalk up to effort and how badly Florida State wanted to be there versus 2 straight seasons where they were national champions and then were in the playoff. But again, I think that this more goes down to matchups where there were a lot of ACC teams that were underdogs and kind of rightfully so. And you can chalk that up to all sorts of stuff, but it's kind of how I expected it to go. I don't want to draw any big conclusions. I don't think that we should from bowl season. But obviously a disappointment to have the conference finish under 500 and 4-6 at that, especially with several matchups that were winnable if these programs are in a little bit better shape than they were.
I'm going to play ACC antagonist just a little bit here, Joey, because I think you pointed out the 2 big disappointments. So Clemson carries the banner, and they do reasonably well. They win by 20 over Oklahoma as an underdog. Then they face mighty Alabama and then take it basically to the last 2 or 3 minutes of the game. Florida State's a big disappointment, losing to Houston, really getting blown out in that game. North Carolina, you mentioned it, 600 rushing yards when Baylor didn't have its first or second string quarterback, top rusher, top wide receiver, and that looked to be one of the better matchups pre-New Year's Eve, and North Carolina really let things down. Virginia Tech was the biggest favorite of the bowl season and squeaked by a Conference USA team that was 6-6. And NC State, playing a comparably seeded Mississippi State team in the SEC, got annihilated like 51-28, whatever the final score was. So, Miami loses to Washington State. That's pretty reasonable there, but that was pretty much of a pick-em field goal game. So was the Duke-Indiana game. So no big victories outside of Clemson defeating Oklahoma, and there were some pretty bad losses there, Mike.
Yeah, there were. And like Joey said, I think it comes down to the fact that a lot of these games, it's not a reflection on the quality of team, but maybe the quality of the matchup. And I think we saw that a lot, not only in the ACC, but throughout the other conferences during bowl season. And Just starting off the top with Virginia Tech, that's right in my wheelhouse. I thought they looked good for the first half. That might be an understatement. They scored 45 points in the first half. There were games this year where they didn't score 45 points. I was pretty impressed with them, but then again, Tulsa's defense is just so terrible that I wasn't sure really what to glean from that, other than I think they really went to sleep in the second half and kind of started the Coach Beamer retirement parade a little bit too early. But they squeaked it out there in Shreveport. Very ugly second half. A lot of scoring in this one, though. It was a pretty entertaining game overall, but if you were a Virginia Tech fan, it was just pretty ugly to watch there, especially in the second half. Like you both alluded to, Miami and Washington State, there was some interesting weather there during that game, but I'm a little bit surprised at how low scoring that was. I guess if there's one overarching surprise, it was that game wasn't like two teams scoring in the 40s. I thought that game would be pretty close, but I thought there would be more than 34 points scored. That was a bit of a surprise, and I guess we can chalk that up to some of the weather that was happening there in Texas that day. But Washington State winning was not a huge surprise. Duke, it was nice to see them win over Indiana. I picked Indiana to win that game because I saw what Indiana did with Ohio State earlier in the season. I thought they could cause Duke a lot of problems. It proved true. I mean, they scored 41 points on Duke, but Duke scored 44. And the Blue Devils, time and time again this season, they found a way to score a ton of points, and then we're still looking at them week by week, wondering where they're getting all this offense from. It's pretty strange. They keep putting up scores in the 30s and the 40s with, top to bottom, not an ultra impressive offense as far as the ACC is concerned, but they continue to score a lot of points, and that was a good victory for them. To finish out their season and win that game in overtime. It was a pretty exciting Pinstripe Bowl, which I didn't exactly see going into it. Pittsburgh losing to Navy. Look, Keenan Reynolds is such a problem to defend just within that offense that Navy runs. It wasn't a huge surprise that Pitt couldn't stop it, even though Pittsburgh had a pretty good rushing defense. The Panthers just proved they didn't have enough offense, which I think we can all agree was a problem for them for most of the season, because Pat Narduzzi brought that defensive mentality from Michigan State, where he was the defensive coordinator in seasons prior. So overall, it was a pretty good season for Pittsburgh, a good year one under Pat Narduzzi, and he's got that program going in a good direction. But none of us were that surprised about that game. North Carolina, I think, is the ultra disappointment of the entire ACC bowl season. Over 600 yards rushing they gave up on defense against a team that, like Mark, you alluded to, didn't have any of their top playmakers on offense. It was pretty inexcusable. I mean, it was something like 5 or 6 different guys took a snap under center. I'm pretty sure Joey and I could have gotten back there in the backfield and run for over 100 yards. I mean, it got to the point there in the second half especially, you were like, man, when is North Carolina going to get a stop? I mean, forget 3 and out, maybe just stop them after 6 or 7 plays. But it just wasn't going to happen. Baylor just kind of had their way. NC State getting blown out surprised me a little bit. I didn't think they would beat Mississippi State, but I don't think Mississippi State's 23 points better than they were. Dak Prescott ended up being the guy that just made that game turn the way it did. 380 yards passing and 4 touchdowns, and he's had a very good college career at Mississippi State. So seeing him having a very, very good performance wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility, but at the same time, I don't think Mississippi State, especially this season, was that much better than NC State. Louisville beating Texas A&M, we knew that would be back and forth with all the Texas A&M turnover at quarterback. We had no idea what to expect there. And then we talked about Clemson. So overall, I'm not extremely surprised with anything that went on. And I guess the Florida State game as well in the Peach Bowl. I don't think they really want to be there, and I think that's what it kind of boils down to, as Joey said a couple minutes ago. So overall, I think it's more of a quality of matchup versus the quality of the individual teams in the ACC, but it kind of all shaped out how I expected.
A lot of things make this show fun, including when we disagree. So I'll disagree on Mississippi State, NC State, because if I was anywhere within 50 miles of Vegas, I would have backed up a gold truck and put it on Mississippi State to win that game. I had no issue marking they're covering 7, they're going to win by 25 points. That one did not surprise me any way, shape, or form in that one. So, Joey, we're deciding that Clemson saved the league on many fronts, but also saved the league just getting to the playoff, because if it slots down worse than that, and I know you're ready to take this one on, if it slots down from there, then even though New Year's Eve, Peach Bowl, it's a big game, but compared to the rest of the playoff, and then the New Year's Day, Rose, Sugar, those games, Fiesta, Ohio State, Notre Dame, that game's going to get forgotten. And if that was the best the ACC was going to do this year, the league would have been completely forgotten, considering the rest of these matchups and the stacking of the bowl games.
Yeah, so before we move on real quick, just wanted to mention I forgot this, and I don't know how, considering this is the second team that I root for, but Louisville against A&M. I was just going to add that I felt like if you look for singular performance of the bowl season from the ACC, aside from Deshaun Watson, it's got to be Lamar Jackson. Both passing and rushing for over 200 yards. What a performance! And he's a guy I think that's attracted now a lot of national attention and is going to get noticed a lot more for that program moving forward into 2016. That said, you ask about all the bowl matchups and the bowl lineup, and this is something that's really irritated me for several years, is looking at the bowl tie-ins specifically for the ACC. I mean, it is not really a sight for sore eyes. Like you said, you've got the playoff or New Year's Six tie-in on any given year, but then after that, I mean, it's a pretty quick drop-off. You're talking about the Russell Athletic Bowl is probably the #1 bowl outside of that set. So got North Carolina. That's a pretty good bowl to go to. And then after that, you're talking about the Sun Bowl, the Pinstripe Bowl, the Independence Bowl, the Military Bowl, the Music City Bowl, and the Belk Bowl. And of those, I mean, starting to pick out desirable locations and desirable matchups, I mean, it's pretty tough. Talking about like the Sun Bowl is 2 time zones away from the rest of the conference. The Belk Bowl, Charlotte, going to Shreveport, some of these locations that aren't exactly destination games. These are not games you're playing down in Florida and in warm weather and in nice locations. And I think if you look at all these Power 5 conferences, the ACC's bowl tie-ins are probably the worst of all of them. And that's something that's frustrated me, and it's something that I think the league has got to do a better job of getting set up. Unfortunately, it's not something that's ever going to move a lot from a year-to-year standpoint. I mean, it's something that you're kind of stuck with for a while as these contracts run out. But that's something that I think that if you're trying to entice other schools to join the conference, or you're trying to drum up fan bases, I mean, you got a pretty tough draw there in December of locations to send your fans to. So it's something that's frustrated me for several years, and I think you'd have a pretty tough time making an argument that the ACC does have a nice bowl lineup. I'm sure Swafford could do that, for sure. That's probably part of his job, but I'm not sure I'd see him as any more as a used car salesman.
And it seems like what's going to hurt the ACC as well as maybe the Big 12 is that whether it's reality or whether it's perception or fan base or eyeballs to the TV, it looks like the SEC and the Big Ten are going to take up more spots in the New Year's Six like they did in the BCS. They're going to get that extra team like Iowa, Ohio State, Michigan State. They got 3 in to the playoff plus the New Year's Six. Then maybe some of the other conferences did, and the SEC did that as well. So it's always interesting to see bowl play and see how things shake out. So we transition to the off season, of course, and if it's all about recruiting. And it amazes me how these fan bases get into this to the point where it's almost more important than winning games is to win the recruiting war and see how high their particular school can get in the recruiting rankings. So let's size things up, starting with Georgia Tech. Joey, your thoughts coming off 3-9, and I don't think that really depicts where the program is. I think it was just a lot of bad breaks and things that went wrong with injuries and so forth. But some of the top recruits that are coming in for 2016.
Yeah, so you're right. It was a rough season, and that doesn't always harbor a lot of attention from recruits, especially those that are closing in on making a decision. Coming into January, I wrote an article about how I think Georgia Tech had 12 commitments at the time. They've got room for about 18 or 19 in this class, so just because they're not approaching the 25 number doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem or that they're doing something wrong. But they had 12, so they had to add 6 or 7 here in January. Had a lot of work to do, really, but there was potential there. There are some top guys that they're looking at, and so they just had their first big visit weekend. Got a commitment from Jay Jones, who's the number 3 athlete in the state of Alabama. He's a quarterback, but could also play, one of the slot back positions or a defensive back position. Just depends on kind of how that shakes out. I think the one guy that is getting maybe the most attention from Georgia Tech fans right now, it's kind of got an interesting story going along with him, is Jordan Woods. He's a defensive end from Florida, and so he was on campus for a visit this past weekend. Prior to that visit, a day or two before, there was a video interview with him, I think that Scout released, where they were talking with him, and they asked him, do you have any leader on your schools? And he basically said, well, I've already committed to a school. He had told the coaches that he was coming, and then he was going to wait until Monday of this week, so wait a few days through the weekend, and then he was going to post like a video announcing his commitment. And the thought was that was not going to be Georgia Tech. The thought was that was going to be Tennessee. And so, but he ended up coming on the visit to Georgia Tech anyways. And as it turns out, through the weekend, I guess he was really impressed by what he saw. His parents were really impressed by what they saw. And not to mention that Tennessee had a little bit of a hiccup themselves of cutting a commit that had been, committed for several months. They pulled his offer for no apparent reason. And so I think we still have not seen a commitment from Woods, and so I think it may have changed things up for him a little bit. He's a 4-star defensive end and would be a really big get for Georgia Tech. And I think within just less than a week, they've gone from effectively dead in the water to maybe in the driver's seat for getting his commitment. So that's a situation that a lot of folks are keeping an eye on and something to be aware of moving forward. The other big one moving forward is going to be Donovan Campbell. So he's a 4-star offensive lineman from Louisiana, about a little bit east of Baton Rouge, but he's been committed to LSU for several months now. And the only reason that Georgia Tech really has an in with this kid, I think, is that his older brother, Christian Campbell, plays quarterback at Georgia Tech. He just finished a redshirt season, and there are some that kind of think that he might be the heir apparent to Justin Thomas once he graduates after 2016. Well, Donovan has interest in maybe playing with his brother, and he likes Atlanta and a lot about the program, and so if they were to flip a commitment from LSU from right out of LSU's backyard, not only would he be the highest rated prospect that Coach Johnson has signed under his tenure at Georgia Tech, but that would be, I think, the recruiting coup of the decade for the Jackets. You don't go into Louisiana and get players that LSU wants just at the drop of a hat. So that's another name. I think that one's going to come down to signing day or shortly before. He just took an official visit to LSU this past weekend, and then had an in-home visit with Les Miles earlier this week. But he is due to officially visit Georgia Tech here at the end of the month, the final weekend before signing day, which I think is something else that can't be understated. So just another guy there to keep an eye on. He would be a huge win for the Jackets moving forward.
This is ACC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time with the best bloggers in the conference, Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC, Joey Weaver from the Rumble seat. Mike, your thoughts about the recruiting situation as we stand less than 2 weeks away from National Signing Day. What has caught your attention?
Yeah, well, Joey did a great job talking about Georgia Tech, so I'll skip them. I think the first team we're going to have to talk about is Florida State. They're shaping up to be another top 5 or 6 class, currently number 4 in ESPN's rankings. They got a lot of guys coming in that I think can make an immediate impact. Levante Taylor is the number 1 cornerback in all of the country right now, and he's planning on signing on National Signing Day. He already has a solid verbal commitment to the Seminoles, and he would come in right away and replace a guy like Jalen Ramsey. And we know that Jimbo Fisher is not afraid to play some of the young guys. We saw in the secondary this year guys like Trey Marshall before he broke his arm. They got guys all across their secondary and on their offense that come in and make an impact right away at a young age. We saw it last year at running back with Dalvin Cook coming in and playing as much as he did as a freshman and then bouncing back and having a pretty good sophomore campaign this year, despite being injury riddled with that hamstring that kind of nagged at him all season long. The one other guy I want to talk about with Florida State is dual threat quarterback Malik Henry. He's a 4-star. I think if he comes in this spring and plays well for them, I believe he's planning on being an early enrollee at Florida State. And if he comes in and plays as well as they hope for in spring camp, he's a guy that could potentially push Sean McGuire depending on his development throughout the spring and the summer. So he's a guy that we're going to have to definitely watch because he can make an impact right away, especially if Sean McGuire underwhelms much like he did in the bowl game. As far as Clemson, they finished the season number 2 in the college football rankings. They're signing another spectacular class, primarily on the defensive side of the football. Dexter Lawrence, he's the number 3 defensive tackle in the country, a 5-star recruit. Their defensive tackles, interior defensive linemen, littering the top 10 or 15 in ESPN's rankings and Rivals rankings also this year. And Clemson grabbed Dexter Lawrence, who's one of the best in this year's class. Rashawn Smith is one of the top outside linebackers in the country coming out of high school. 4-star recruit. He should make an immediate impact for Clemson as well. So they have guys right away. They're going to be filling in for some of the key roles they're going to be missing on the defensive side of the ball, because with Shaq Lawson going into the NFL, they're going to be looking for guys that are not only already on campus, but guys that are coming in to make an immediate impact. Another school to watch, I think, is Miami, just because of Al Golden's departure and bringing in Mark Richt, seeing the guys that he's flipping to the school, as well as some guys they're hoping to sign that they're still in the running for on National Signing Day. Right now, they're in position to be a top 15 class, and they could climb even higher if they get some of the recruits that are high on their wish list. Some guys I want to talk about briefly: the #1 athlete in the class of 2016, Tyler Bird, is planning on signing with them on signing day on February 3rd. They also got another pocket passer, Jack Allison, and now, while he might not be a quarterback that will make an immediate impact with Brad Kaya coming back once again for his junior season, he's a guy that we can watch somewhere along the line for Mark Richt, because we know how much he likes his pocket passing quarterbacks that he not only had at Georgia, but that he will have at Miami with Brad Kaya, and then maybe Jack Allison here sometime down the line. And then Virginia Tech signing Joshua Jackson, a quarterback, Divine Diablo, who's one of the top 20 receivers in the country coming out of high school. And they're going to consistently have another top 30 class, and Justin Fuente is hoping just to hold on to some of these commitments, and Frank Beamer and his guys and his coaching staff were able to recruit. So I think keeping Bud Foster on the staff and Zon Burden, who was the wide receivers coach, he's now transitioning to a role as a running backs coach for Virginia Tech. I think keeping the two of them on the staff, two of the better coordinators coming over from Frank Beamer's coaching staff, will definitely help Virginia Tech here moving forward as they head into next season with Justin Fuente at the helm, who's still trying to learn the ropes of recruiting in Virginia. But the other hope for Fuente and the Hokies is that he's able to pull some of the guys he recruited at the University of Memphis. Since Memphis isn't all that far from Blacksburg, maybe they'll follow Fuente to Blacksburg here over the next 2 or 3 seasons. Some of the guys that he's been recruiting over the last couple of years, maybe roll them into Blacksburg and see if they can make an impact with the Hokies as well. So I think top to bottom, the ACC is going to be well represented in the top 25 or 30 of the power rankings once all the experts and the pundits come out with them here after National Signing Day in a couple of weeks.
Hey, Joey, anything outside of Atlanta that's caught your attention?
Really just think it's kind of an interesting season to watch as far as recruiting and kind of how some of these new coaches do. Obviously, there has been a lot of turnover within the league with Mark Richt, Justin Fuente, Bronco Mendenhall et al. And so kind of seeing what they're doing with their new classes is something that I'm definitely keeping an eye on over the next month or so. The other thing is that Duke has put together another surprisingly good recruiting class compared to their standards. Depending on where you look, you've got several 4-star type of players in there, and so if they can hold that together, I think that's another fairly impressive class for what you're used to seeing from Duke. And I am not exactly a major Duke supporter myself, and I'm not a super believer in their program, but the things that they've been able to do under Cutcliffe, I will tell you, is nothing short of amazing given what that program has historically been. So really, between that program and then seeing what guys like Richt are doing down at Miami, Fuente at Virginia Tech, I think those are the interesting storylines to watch here in recruiting season. And obviously, I'll be a little bit of a homer here and say kind of what Georgia Tech is able to do with several top prospects are interested and set up to visit and everything like that. If they are able to bring in those recruits coming off of a pretty poor season, I think it might end up being one of the more underrated recruiting efforts in the country at a time when a lot of Georgia Tech fans are really not believers in the recruiting ability of Paul Johnson and his staff. So that's some of the big things that I'm really looking for here in January.
Yeah, when you consider that Duke and Miami basically in recent years have arrived at nearly the same record, if anything, Duke's had a better record in the last few years under David Cutcliffe. They're arriving at those results from opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to recruiting base, resources, and so forth, especially considering South Florida versus the academic requirements at Duke. It is pretty remarkable what David Cutcliffe and his staff has been able to accomplish there. All right, this is another ACC breakdown. I think that pretty much wraps it up. Joey Weaver from the Rumble seat and also Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC. Guys, it's always a pleasure to have you on and provide some insight and information.
Enjoyed it. Thanks, Mark.